Hey everybody, hope you're having a good day. Today's build guide is for the Hive Scum class. We're going to be focusing on the Adrenaline Frenzy Keystone. This is a Keystone that provides you with a 10% attack speed and 25% melee damage buff once you have enough Adrenaline stacks. You get Adrenaline stacks by hitting enemies with your melee attack. You get twice as many if it's a crit. So with this build, there's a lot of synergies built in. We're going to be building crit because we want to crit more to get Adrenaline stacks faster, and that's going to help us attack faster. And our main way of getting toughness back is Precision Violence, where melee hits give us 4% toughness, crits and weak spots give us 8%, crit weak spots give us 12%, and so because we're attacking faster, we're triggering this more often, and because we're critting more, we're triggering the higher value toughness gains of this. Because of this, we're going to choose a melee weapon, which is fast attacking, and maybe something that has extra bonus crit to it. In the background footage, I'm using the Devil's Claw sword. However, this build works extremely well with the Tactical Axe, or with the dual shivs, as well as the chain sword. In each case, you're going to look for blessings like Shred that increase your critical hit chance, and then you're going to look for something that increases either your cleave or your damage, and that's going to be your secondary blessing usually. In my case, I've gone with Shred and Rampage on the Devil's Claw sword. For the dump stat, we've gone with Mobility because we have extremely good dodges anyway. And then for the damage bonuses, we've gone with Maniac and Unyielding because this weapon does particularly good damage against both of those target types, and then accelerating that to a higher value is a lot of value because the targets that have those armor classes have high health pools, stuff like Maniacs and bosses. But a consequence of taking the Devil's Claw sword is it's not great against Crushers. And that's why we've brought Boombringer, which gives us a rocket launcher to eliminate a bunch of Crushers all at once if we need to. That's also why we've brought the Needle Pistol, which you can take 4 shots into a Crusher with a Needle Pistol, and that will be enough chemical toxin to be able to defeat the thing. That's assuming you take the Carapace perk, which we do, and we also take the Unyielding one, which means that anytime we dump 5 or 6 shots into a boss, it's going to take a lot of damage over time, and we can focus on all the horde enemies around the boss while we're doing a bunch of poison damage to the boss. It's pretty great. For the blessing, we go for Run and Gun because it decreases our spread at all times, which is basically the accuracy of the Needle Pistol. The Strip Down is the second blessing, and that will just give us immunity to range attacks when we're sprinting over 50% stamina, but that one doesn't come into play very often. It's kind of irrelevant. These are the Curios we're going with. We take the Stamina one in order to get the attack speed from the Swift Endurance perk. We also take triple combat ability regeneration because we want our Rampage to be up quite a lot. We take triple revive speed, 2 gunner resist, and a stamina regen. That brings us back to the melee parts of our build. We take Tertium Welcome to give us 15% melee damage on the first enemy hit each attack. We have Float Like a Butterfly, which means that for 3 seconds after a successful dodge, we're going to get 20% critical strike chance. It also triggers on perfect blocks. For the aura, we're going to go for Ruffian for a 10% melee damage buff. That lets us get to Long Lasting, which is a 5% increase to our stim duration. Just lets our stim provide a little bit more extra damage and a little bit extra cooldown reduction. If somebody already has the 10% melee damage aura in your group, you might want to stay with your aura anyway, even though it doesn't stack, because to switch to the 5% crit chance buff is kind of nice, but it also forces you into Blessed Stims, which is just not as good a talent in that tier, as opposed to the 5 seconds on your stims. Our ability is Rampage, which just helps our melee focus. It is a huge buff to our melee power, 50%, and 20% melee attack speed, which of course adds that synergy that I mentioned earlier. The 25% melee damage reduction helps a lot with our mitigation. And I forget if there's any moments in this particular background footage where I do it, but I often do. The moment I take a tiny bit of toughness health, I will activate the ability to just restore that toughness to max so that any follow-up attack that hits afterwards doesn't start to damage my actual health pool. But of course, if you're completely out of toughness, then it's going to restore you to full, and that's even more value. We take the node that gives us a bunch of cleave, it also provides some attack power, and then we take the node that our heavy attacks will have 25% rending. This node is more specific to the Devil's Claw sword, so some versions of this build that use other melee weapons might not want this node. Then in the lower part of the tree, where all the cool toys are, we have Swift Endurance for some attack speed. We have the Sweet Spot, which gives us much more powerful weak spot hits. We have Channeled Devastation, which is typically up to the max value of 15% melee damage at all times, as long as you maintain a 30% crit chance. We have Punching Above One's Weight, which is 15% damage against elites and monstrosities. Hive City Brawler, which means that depending on if we're at max stamina, we're going to get 20% damage reduction. If we're at min stamina, we're going to get 20% melee damage. And when we're in somewhere in between, we're going to get 10%, or whatever mix we are. Battering Strength further increases our melee cleave so that we can hit more targets, and we do that in part because we want coated weaponry, which means that our melee crits will apply 1 stack of Chem Toxin. And of course, if we're attacking more enemies at once, then a single crit that sweeps through a bunch of enemies is going to give more Chemtox value. So there's a subtle value here, which is hard to describe. Basically, when you do a cleave in Darktide, you'll do full damage to the first target, and each additional target takes less and less and less damage. However, if the entire attack is a cleave, then you're applying chemical toxin to every single enemy in the cleave. Chemical toxin itself doesn't have that diminishing returns, and that means you're doing full damage potentially. Alright, that probably takes us back to Adrenaline Frenzy itself. Stoked Rage is the subnode that we take. It is a thing that's going to double the duration of our Adrenaline Frenzy to 20 seconds. It's not a fun node, it's just kind of a tax to be able to take Adrenaline Frenzy. The second one is quite nice. It regenerates 5% of our toughness per second while we have Adrenaline Frenzy active. And sadly, all of the other subnodes aren't worth taking. They're just pretty bad overall. I'm not even sure if there's any use cases for any of them, with the exception of Uncontrolled Aggression, which is probably okay on lower difficulty levels because you don't have as many enemies, and so you want your adrenaline stacks to decay a bit slower. But on higher difficulties, there are so many enemies to hit to get adrenaline stacks from that you just don't ever need this. For our Stim Lab, we have gone with Fury for the rending, and that just helps our Devil's Claw Sword not be quite as terrible against Crushers in the cases where we actually need to use it against a Crusher. We've also gone with Hypex, which is part of the cooldown line. It gives us melee kills grant 75% ability cooldown regeneration for 1 second. That just means that we're going to try to use our stim off of the cooldown of our Rampage, so when our Rampage expires, that's when we're looking to use our stim, and then when we use it, we're going to try to get as many melee kills as possible, because the more we do, our mainline Rampage will come up much, much faster. There's also a pretty decent argument that you could go down the attack speed line, but that's essentially what we're getting when we're keeping our Rampage available more frequently, is we're getting faster attack speed, because Rampage provides 20% attack speed. For the Devil's Claw itself, it's a weapon that has a really good basic horde clear with all of your light attack spam. Light attacks are still good against unarmored ragers, and also the backs of bulwarks. However, against anything tougher than that, including maulers, you're going to want to use heavy attack spam basically against everything. A lot of times in the footage you might see me use a heavy into a light, and do a heavy light heavy, but it really just is heavy spam that is better for this weapon against anything that has any sort of armor. Now, because our heavy one is a strike down and it comes straight from the top, that means it's really hard to avoid hitting the heads of maulers and plasma gunners. And that's kind of a small problem because it means that we're hitting the carapace armor of those enemies rather than the flak armor that is the rest of their body. So if you can help it, you want to try to hit those guys in the shoulders with your heavy attack strike down. But of course your horizontal attack is fantastic for hitting them in the body, which is right where you want to hit them. The downside, of course, being that it's a horizontal attack, which means there may be other enemies in the way, preventing you from actually hitting the mauler that you want to hit. Even the heavies aren't that great against armored targets, and so that's why Rampage and also our Stim both are loaded up with a bunch of rending, so that when we have those buffs active, we're going to do a lot more damage against those armored targets with this weapon that otherwise is not that great against armored targets. The special attack of the Devil's Claw Sword is probably the strongest part of it. It's a parry. When you press it, your sword is going to go kind of crosswise in front of you, like you're blocking, and when a basic enemy attacks this in melee, you're going to block that attack, and then you're also going to take an attack, and it will be aimed at the cursor, and so you still want to be aiming, because when you finally get that parry attack, you want to be aiming at the head of whatever you want to actually be attacking with the parry. It doesn't have to be the same enemy that you're trying to parry, so like a side enemy can be parried in order to damage something that's directly in front of you. However, things off-screen, of course, can't be parried. Now, where it gets really tricky is that there is some sort of a perfect parry window, where even if you're parrying some really big attack, like a mauler overhead, if you parry it at precisely the right moment, you can block the damage and do a boatload of damage back in return. I don't quite know the mechanics of that yet. I'll have to get back to you with another video in the future on that one, I think. But what I do know is that it is also particularly amazing against bosses. When you fight a boss, you know that their attacks are going to come out in an AoE. Often they can't avoid attacking you, and that means you can do your parry, and your parry will do a boatload of damage, more than you would do if you were just spam attacking the thing. Now, demon hosts, normally when they attack you, it's a flurry of blows, and you have to block through it all and hope that your stamina just lasts long enough in order to block through it all while your teammates work the thing down. But with the Devil's Claw Sword, you can essentially solo the thing. As long as you parry most of its attacks and then dodge or block the other ones, you're going to do so much damage in return that you will eventually defeat them if you time it all right. That doesn't mean that you aren't going to take a boatload of corruption damage, you certainly will, but at least you'll have defeated the thing. Basically, the subtle advantage there is that when you do a parry, you're still blocking the damage, but you're not costing any of your stamina, and so you can use a parry in order to kind of regenerate stamina. So if you mix between blocking and parrying, you have a lot of defensive capability with this weapon. And that's basically the build. With our Devil's Claw and the buffs we have going, we will clear out hordes almost as fast as a Psyker's Flame Staff. It's just kind of ridiculous once it gets going. However, we need to be careful when we run up against armored targets. We need to switch our attacks to heavy attacks, and we need to consider using one of our cooldowns, our Stim or Rampage. When things get really hairy, that's when we bring out our rocket launcher to clear out a bunch of crushers or sometimes a bunch of bulwarks. We have particularly excellent boss damage, and that's in part because if we get aggro from the boss, we're able to do our parry attacks to do incredible amounts of damage per counterattack hit. It means that we're one of the types of classes that is a bit like a shield ogre, where you are kind of safe to be able to be the one to pull a demon host. If you just want to pull it to get out of the way or to style on it, you can do either of those things. This build also works with a lot of other weapons. The chainsword kind of has the same sort of feel as the Devil's Claw Sword. The downside of not having parry, I think, is the big drawback there. The crowbar is almost there, but it probably doesn't attack quite fast enough to really fully maximize this build in terms of all of the benefits that are coming in from attacking really fast. The Mark 1 shivs are fantastic because they have that fast attack speed, they have a high base crit, they have a bunch of cool things that can happen from crit based on their different blessings, and then they can also deal with crushers in a slightly better way than the Devil's Claw Sword can. I tried the Mark 3 shivs as well. They're the shivs that have the more horizontal attacks. They didn't quite perform up to my expectations. You basically have to use your needle pistol exclusively against armored targets because those Mark 3 shivs are just not clearing anything that isn't a horde. But of course, you have amazing horde clear, but ultimately you don't really need somebody that can just focus on horde clear, so. And possibly the best for last, the Tactical Axe is extremely good with this build. I do think that my earlier build guide that is focused on the Tactical Axe, which I'll hopefully link in the top right, that build is better if you want to just maximize the Tactical Axe's power, but this build will focus on putting out a lot of attack speed with the Tactical Axe, and it will still give you a lot of armor piercing as long as you're landing the weak spot hits. That's the magic of the Tactical Axe, is it can just do light attack spam against headshots and then get an insane amount of damage output in melee and still have really amazing dodge values. And that's basically it. If you have any suggestions for future build guides, let me know, and you can also check out my channel in order to see if I've already made that build guide. If you enjoy this type of content and want more build guides, please consider liking, commenting, or subscribing. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.
Rampage! Determination and the steeled heart makes all things possible.
A simple truth. But then, the simple truths are often the best.
Keystone!
Right. Get this place secured. Your support team will handle the rest.
Neutralize that gunner!
I never thought I'd say this, but we can learn from
Grenade! My thanks, arbitrator!
I shield! Watch for a cocktail!
I've got it for you!
Drowning! Drowning!
I need you to disable the Skyfire defenses. Let's give Masodi some room.
Hello! Got it right up! Thank you, Jim! Thank you, Jim! Look at the scene!
We have a shotgunner!
Occupying
The liability is down! Good work!
a fitting end to the foul rager!
Start clear!
Okay, start. Next up, your support team needs a landing gear.
Ammo neutralized!
Sniper! Dave! Sniper gone!
There is no more fire!
All right! Face up!
Closing in! Stay alert!
Oh! Reckon I took a wrong turn.
I require ammunition!